The USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council is pleased to have you. My name is Mackenzie Femright. I am the Food Marketing Manager with the Council, and I will be the moderator today. I would like to give a very special thank you to the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. Their Specialty Crop Block Grant Program made our 4-part webinar series possible. We are currently on our 3rd webinar. The 4th webinar will be on extrusion and baking and will be held sometime probably mid to late October, so please be looking out for that. We will have archives of all the webinars on our website at www.p-lentil.com under our Food Industry tab. Today's webinar is on how to use pulse protein in value-added food and beverage product development. Our guest speaker is Dan Best, who is the president of Best Vantage Incorporated, a food technology, business, and marketing development company based in Northbrook, Illinois. Dan holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and biochemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a master's degree in food science and nutrition, and a MBA with a corporate finance specialization from the University of St. Thomas. Before I hand it over to Dan, I would like to take care of some housekeeping. If you all have any questions, please send them over to me, and I will have a question-answer period after the presentation. Also, there will be a 5-question survey that will pop up immediately following the webinar. So if you could take a few minutes to fill that out, it would be greatly appreciated. With all that said, I'm passing the torch to Dan. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I'm waiting for the transfer here. And there we go. I hope that we're all on now. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. Well, we'll get started. Thank you for the nice introduction, Mackenzie. Well, I've got to say that when we started working on this issue of pulse proteins, our subject just got bigger and bigger. And it's an area of that's been of great interest to us, but we've tried to package a lot of information into a tight time period, so please bear with us. We've got a lot of information to cover. As Mackenzie indicated, this will be archived for future reference, so at some point you'll be able to access this webinar at the website and at least be able to follow along in the presentation. So as Mackenzie indicated, this program has been funded by the Idaho State Department of Agriculture, especially Crop Block Grant Program, and we're very grateful to them for giving us this opportunity to talk about the subject of pulses, which I find to be a greatly interesting topic, especially for these days. What you're seeing here is pulses in various stages of production up to the point of harvest. And I'd like to just quickly go over the presentation objectives for this webinar. We'd like to present an overview on pulses and pulse-based ingredients. I know that this is a topic that can be pretty confusing because the nomenclature can be very confusing. We'd like to talk about dietary protein and its importance to consumers, the role of proteins in nutrition and health and how we measure that. Pulse proteins in food and beverage formulation will be the key objective of this presentation, and then we'll take it to the conclusions, provide you with some resources to go to for more information, and go to our question and answer session. Starting section 1, an overview on pulses and pulse-based ingredients, we'd like to talk about definitions and nomenclature, nutritional advantages of pulses, pulse production in the United States. We are a very important producer of pulses on a global basis, and there is some very great advantages to the pulse production that occurs in the United States on the world market. First of all, what are pulses? Pulses are legumes. They're classified separately from oil seeds such as peanuts and soybeans, and hopefully that will become clear shortly. Overall, there are 10 categories of pulses as defined by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and we're trying to get the world to accept this type of nomenclature, although there's admittedly some overlap in definitions and when pulses are referred to in common usage. Of the 10 categories, 7 are of commercial importance as foods, and only 5 are significant in international food trade. The remainder of these pulses, the 3 remaining categories of pulses not referred to, serve primarily as animal feeds. Now, because they return or fix nitrogen in the soil, they're a highly sustainable food crop, and they're often used as rotational crops to restore the quality of farmland. And they also require only minimal agricultural chemical treatments. They're rich in protein, very high in protein quality. We'll talk more about that. Soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, and they are low in oil content, which is one of their distinguishing characteristics from other pulses such as soybeans, for example. They're gaining a lot of interest and attention as nutritional superior foods and food ingredients. And now we're seeing more and more ways that pulses are used in foods, which brings us to the topic of this presentation. Very importantly, they're free of gluten and other allergens. We'll talk about that a little more as well. But they do not require any warning statements on food ingredient, on food packages. The pulses that are important to human consumption are chickpeas, also known as garbanzo beans, dry beans, of which there are many varieties, for example, navy beans, red beans, kidney beans, black beans, lentils, of which there are several varieties available in the United States as well, dry peas, which also known as field peas, and broad beans or faba beans. Pigeon peas and cowpeas are the 2 that are not as important in international trade, although black-eyed peas, which you see in the on the bottom there, are an important cowpea that is found in North America. We will focus only on 3 categories in this presentation. That's chickpeas, also known as garbanzo beans, dry field peas, which are found in yellow and green varieties, lentils, which are typically found in 3 varieties in North America, regular lentils, pardina lentils, and red lentils. And the focus that we want to draw you to is that they do offer exceptional nutritional value. Looking at pulse composition compared to other major sources of protein, we find that the dry peas, regular lentils, and chickpeas are high in protein, considerably higher than cereals, not as high as soy, and lower than beef. But they are very low in fat, as distinguished, this is another distinguishing characteristic between pulses and soy. They also have a fairly high level of carbohydrate, both in the form of fiber and in the form of starches. And these carbohydrates do have very important functional properties when we look at pulses as food ingredients. And their dietary fiber is very high as compared to cereals, for example. So this is another very important nutritional attraction of pulses as ingredients. Plus, they offer a superior amino acid profile. They offer very high and important vitamin content, including folic acid. They're rich in minerals. They have a very low glycemic index, in part because the starch carbohydrates are bound up with the protein and fiber fractions. And they are non-GMO. But our focus will be on the proteins. The United States is one of the premier pulse-producing regions in the world. We rank right now about 9th in dry pea production, 5th in lentil production, and 16th in chickpea production. We also provide a superior production, manufacturing, and distribution infrastructure. And this is very important in terms of the quality and the consistency of quality of pulses that are produced in North America. The United States also offers multiple university and technical centers to provide ongoing technical support and innovation to food manufacturers. Because of the U.S.'s highly developed quality grading, handling, and production infrastructure, U.S. pulse producers generally receive top dollar for their pulses in world export markets. When we look at pulses as food ingredients, dry peas, chickpeas, and lentils are typically processed into flours, into flakes, pastes, or as pulse cereal blends. Now, the pulses can be further processed into protein concentrates and isolates, starches, and fiber fractions. And there are some companies that further process the pulses into particulates, like extruded pellets. A very important factor in the production of pulses is that there has to be a step of enzyme inactivation, because like soy, there are lipoxidase enzymes that can result in off-flavor development if they're not inactivated at some point in the process. If we look at dietary protein and consumers, we'd like to talk about how consumers view proteins in foods today. Pulses no longer being just a center plate item, but working their way into other parts of our food experience. Pulse protein ingredients and pulse protein economics. Now, how do consumers view proteins in foods? We got a very valuable insight from the International Food Information Council when they did their annual Food and Health Survey on consumer attitudes toward food safety, nutrition, and health. The demographics of the study were, the study was based on just slightly over 1,000 Americans aged 18 to 80 and weighted by age, education, gender, race and ethnicity, and region. If we look at top-line results of that study, 48% of those surveyed, almost half of those surveyed, try to consume products with more protein. That's an awfully big consumer driver for protein consumption and the design of more protein into food products. 84% of those surveyed agreed strongly or somewhat strongly that it is easy to incorporate protein into their diets. Well, thanks to pulses, we can make it even easier. As to what was driving some of that demand for protein in foods, we got some very good indications by these questions. That we found that the survey found that 88% of those responding recognized that protein helps to build muscle. So there was a direct link to protein consumption and health. 70% recognized that protein helps people to feel full, and 60% recognized that high protein diets can help with weight loss. So between weight loss and muscle health, we find that there's some very important and consistent drivers for consumers to be seeking more protein in their foods. Continuing with the survey asked what sources of protein consumers tried to consume. And this gives a very nice breakdown. If we look at the top, I found it interesting, poultry was so high, but nuts, seed, and nut butter scored an 87% score. Now, pulses are seeds, and in a way they can be processed into seed products. Hummus is a very popular pulse butter, if you want. But it's important that consumers recognize the value of seeds as a source of protein. Where do we find beans, which are a generic term for pulses? We find them comfortably established between cheese, beef, milk, and yogurt as a source of protein. So consumers recognize that beans or pulses are very good sources of proteins. If we look at products like cereals, protein bars, protein shakes or beverages, and protein supplements, these are all categories in which pulses can play an important role, and we will talk about some of those specifically. Looking at pulse protein ingredients, pulses offer a wide variety of protein and starch ingredients for use in formulation. We have whole pulses, we have roasted pulses available, flakes, grits, raw flours, air classified flours, which vary in the ratio of starch to protein, for example, pre-cooked flours, pre-gelled flours, protein concentrates, protein isolates, starches, bran meal, and fiber. So there's a wide variety of pulse-based ingredients that are available to the product developer. If we look at a list of pulse ingredient suppliers, these are some ingredient suppliers that we would encourage that you contact at some point if you want more information on specific pulse ingredients and their functional and nutritional benefits. Well, proteins, pulses have played a very important role as a protein found at central plate or a main meal occasion. This is especially true in South Asia, where pulses are consumed in very high quantity, the highest level of pulse consumption in the world actually, but also in Africa, Latin America, and Also, in our own diets, we find pulses taking a main meal entree role in the forms of as additions to pasta, also in soups where with beans, people are very familiar with that, paste and dips like hummus, as I mentioned, salads with beans, chili with beans, and tortillas. Hispanic food has been a big driver of pulse consumption in the United States. But now with the development of new and improved pulse-based ingredients and especially proteins, we're finding pulses working their way into beverages and smoothies, extruded snacks, nutrition bars, breakfast cereals, pastas, baked and sweet goods, bakery and tortillas, we've already mentioned that, and also as protein supplements. Pea fiber, for example, has been a very interesting ingredient in terms of its demand among bodybuilders and fitness enthusiasts. Now, pulse protein ingredients have really enabled the functional, nutritional, and economic enhancement of foods and beverages in categories where we couldn't see those benefits before. I should also point out that the interest in vegetarianism and veganism has been a big driver in innovation for pulse-based ingredients and foods. So pulse ingredients are now finding a way into a wide variety of consumer products. These are some of the products that have been developed fairly recently, from pea proteins to pastas to snacks and breakfast cereals based on pulses. But this is still a very, very early stage category. Pulse proteins are highly functional, they're cost effective, they're cost reliable. Common protein ingredients that the product developer works with include eggs, where you can work with albumin proteins and yolk proteins, and there has been some development of enzyme modified proteins for specialty applications in the egg industry. With milk, we look at protein concentrates, protein isolates, and also we're finding enzyme modified protein products in the dairy industry. With pulses, with all the ingredients that have been developed from pulses, we can find several suppliers of protein concentrates and protein isolates, but although there is work being done to enzyme modify pulse proteins, it's, as far as I know, still largely at university and research centers. The terminology for functional protein ingredients is very similar to that for other ingredients. If we look at the raw material sources for proteins, soy, pulses, milk, and whey, the raw materials vary greatly in their protein content, but when we get to protein concentrates, whether it's soy protein concentrate or SPC, pulse protein concentrate, PPC, milk protein concentrate or whey protein concentrate, what we're really referring to is an ingredient that contains between 40 and 90% protein. That's quite a spread. If we start getting into more pure forms of protein, then we get into the isolates, which are 90+% protein. But we can find soy protein isolates, pea protein isolates, milk protein isolates, whey protein isolates. The nomenclature is pretty much the same. With eggs, of course, eggs, whether they're wet or dry, the rules are somewhat different. I mean, we're dealing with yolk protein or albumin protein, and those concentrations vary considerably from the other protein ingredients. Pulses are really the focus of our conversation, so we'll continue on that basis, looking at functional benefits of pulses in foods. If we look at egg and dairy protein functionality, they provide a lot of specific benefits in food product development, ranging from structure, strength, texture, coloration, emulsification, gelation, film forming, foaming, water control, viscosity, flavor, opacity and turbidity in beverages, particle suspension in beverages and soups and other products, adhesion and agglomeration. Pretty much all of those benefits can be found in pulses: structure, strength, texture, mouthfeel, either directly from the pulse proteins themselves or in combination with pulse starches and fibers. If we look at pea protein, for example, benefits that we can derive from using pea protein ingredients include aeration and foaming, binding and adhesion, emulsification, humectancy, crispiness and strength in snacks and extruded products, for example, and thickening and mouthfeel. And those apply to a wide variety of products, and some of which applications we'll be talking about in much greater detail. If we look at the economics of using pulse protein ingredients, then some additional advantages become clear. If we look at the 10-year price trends for dried whole egg, dairy, and pea ingredients, we find that there's a lot of fluctuation in the price of dried whole egg, milk solids, non-fat dry milk, or whey protein concentrate. But they fluctuate in part with the raw material cost of milk and eggs. And in part, that is because the raw materials are so dependent on the cost of feed materials, and in the last few years, the price of corn and soybeans has been extremely high because of drought conditions. However, if we look at pulses, the raw material price of pulses has been rather stable and considerably lower than the raw material price trends for the other protein sources. Well, what does that mean? If we look at ingredient price on a unit protein basis, we find that the dollars per kilogram of protein in these various materials ranges considerably. If we look at peas, the dollar per kilogram protein in field peas is about 80 cents, which compares very favorably against the dollar per kilogram of protein for the raw material. As we mentioned, the raw material cost of field peas and other pulses is considerably lower than the raw material cost of animal proteins. But where it gets interesting is in ingredient price volatility. Why is that important? Well, when you design a product, and let's say you use levels of milk or egg protein in that product, the future viability of that product will depend on the cost of those raw materials. And if you find that the cost of some of the key ingredients in your product go up over time because of shortages, droughts, or whatever, the viability of your product in the marketplace may be threatened. Going back to the average price in terms of dollars per kilogram over a 10-year period, for field peas we have a price of 16 cents versus at the other end of the extreme, whole milk solids at $4 per kilogram, which is a very high value. But if we measure the volatility of those price fluctuations in terms of plus or minus 2 standard deviations above the mean, we see that the standard deviation volatility for peas is measured in only about 12 cents per kilogram, versus a much higher value for milk or egg protein ingredients. Therefore, peas offer, for want of a better phrase, a better insurance against price volatility in food formulation. Now, one of the things I'd like to remind everybody is if you do have questions after this webinar, please feel free to contact Mackenzie Femright at the email indicated below. And if you need to reach me as well, my contact information will be given later. What we'd like to look at in this section is nutritional and nutraceutical values of pulse proteins, measures of protein value, protein requirements, U.S. nutrient content claims, and allergenicity. Starting with nutritional and nutraceutical values of protein, well, we all recognize that we need protein in our diet just for basic body maintenance and repair purposes. So for nutrition, we need protein. Also, it has benefits for weight management and satiety. The consumers were right in that on that score in that IFIX study that I cited earlier. But there's also some nutraceutical benefits that are becoming, I think, that are up and coming points of interest for our industry. It's still early stage, but the role of specific amino acids in tissue repair, in cholesterol reduction, cancer prevention, and psychological and behavioral activity are all areas of very active research, and they're coming up with some fascinating results. The role of branch-chain amino acids, the branch-chain amino acids are leucine, isoleucine, and valine in muscle repair and wound healing are already well recognized by the bodybuilding and fitness industries. You're finding products that emphasize these branch-chain amino acids servicing consumers that are involved in those activities. If we look at measures of protein value, the key is essential amino acids. Essential amino acids are those amino acids our bodies cannot produce on our own, so we need to obtain them from our diet. The essential amino acids here are the ones that are highlighted in orange: histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. The ones that are highlighted in yellow, arginine, cysteine, and tyrosine, are essential for infants only. Now, if we want to compare pulses against pulses, when it comes to amino acid profiles, they're pretty much the same. If you look at the values for aspartic acid, for example, versus isoleucine, if you go across each of these three columns, you find for each amino acids, you find that they're pretty well similar. So it's fair to say that proteins are largely interchangeable between these three pulse sources. Now, one area that pulses do excel in is high lysine, and they serve to complement the low lysine quality of cereals. This is well recognized in third world countries, where often beans and rice or beans and other cereal combinations find their way into the center of people's diets. But especially if you're serving a vegetarian or a vegan audience, you're going to want to make sure that you have an amino acid profile that is well balanced, because after all, their entire source of protein and amino acid quality is going to come from vegetable materials. So combining cereals with pulses gives you a superior amino acid profile, and we'll be able to address that in a little more detail in a moment. How do we measure protein value? One is protein digestibility score, which here Merriam-Webster defines as a measure of the efficiency of protein in a foodstuff for the maintenance and growth of the bodily tissues of an individual. And they compute this as a percentage of the protein that is actually utilized in the body, how the essential amino acids are utilized, for example. And what we find is that the egg protein is always used as the standard for the optimum protein. And we find that the protein in dry peas, and as I mentioned, therefore lentils and chickpeas as well, because they are pretty much interchangeable. But the quality of the protein as measured by protein digestibility score for dry peas is very close to that of beef, twice that of corn, and I should say probably most of the other cereal proteins as well. So dry peas and beef have comparable protein digestibility scores. Another measure that's used and is favored by the UN and the Food and Agricultural Organization is the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, which is a measure of protein quality found by multiplying the percentage of the digestibility of the protein by its amino acid composition. So it's not just which amino acids are there, but how digestible they are. If we look at the PDCAAS values for pea protein, we find that they come very close to what the ideal Food and Agricultural Organization requirement is. In fact, in all of these, they well fit in with the FAO requirements for both children and adults, with the possible exception of tryptophan, which you'll find is kind of right on the cusp for children, but is certainly more than acceptable for adults. In other words, we're dealing with a high quality of protein as measured by PDCAAS. Now, if we look at how the PDCAAS values for protein score compared to other proteins, again, eggs score at the top of any index that there is for protein quality. But if we look at wheat flour scores at about a 0.43, And if we look at peas, yellow split peas, that's the entire pea. That's not a pea protein or pea protein concentrate or isolate. That's the entire pea. Together, the quality of the protein goes up to 0.64, so already higher than a cereal protein. If we look at the pea protein isolate, where the protein has been taken out of its carbohydrate matrix, the score jumps to 0.82, and if we combine pea protein isolate with wheat protein, or wheat gluten in this case, we jump up the value to 0.87. So that's a good indication of how the form of the protein and the combination of this protein, of a pulse protein with other proteins, can really boost up the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score to a very significant level. So how much protein do people need? Well, the recommended dietary allowance for protein is going to vary greatly by who consumes that protein. For infants, it's 10 grams a day. For teenage males, 52. Teenage females, a little bit lower at 46. Adult males, 56. Adult females, still at 46. And for pregnant or lactating females, it jumps up to 71 grams per day. Now, to make it easier for us, they have come up with a value called the daily reference value for protein, and that's just a benchmark value that is used to measure adequate levels of protein, of daily protein intake. And what value they came up with for protein is 50 grams per day, and that's an important value when it comes to calculating nutrient content claims for a product. I should also point out, if you look at the bottom of this slide, that even though protein is pretty much a given that people are consuming adequate amount of protein in our society, that may be a mistaken premise, because there are certain segments in our society that may not be consuming sufficient amounts of protein. Most of these are older adult women, where 8%, according to national health studies, about 8% are found to consume less than the minimum requirement. In general, females tend to consume a little less protein, and the median intake of children is also 13.4% below minimum, indicating that there are segments in the younger populations that are not consuming sufficient protein. So I think it'd be a mistaken premise to say that everybody's consuming enough protein. And maybe consumers are onto something when they say they're looking for more protein in their diet. Well, what about protein content claims? It would be nice, if you're going to put a lot of protein into your product, that you should be able to make claims about that product. Well, the U.S. nutrient content claims are addressed in 21 CFR 101.54. So you can always go to that for the full regulation addressing nutrient content claims, and we'll try to make it easier in this presentation. To make a claim that a product has added protein, extra protein, is fortified with protein, enriched with protein, or has more protein, it must contain 10% of the protein DRV value, which for protein is 10% of 50 would be 5 grams. So it must contain more than 10% of the protein DRV value than the reference serving size of that food. And that's important, because you'll see a lot of food packages that have serving sizes, but those serving sizes are not what the regulations are based upon. They're based upon those reference serving size of that food, which is called a RAC, a reference amount customarily consumed per eating occasion. Looking, and the full definition of a RAC is given at the bottom of the slide, and you can find the specific RACs for food products, different food products, in 21 CFR 101.12 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Moving on to what is a good source of protein, contains protein, or provides protein. You can make that claim if the food contains more than 10% of the DRV for protein, i.e. more than 5 grams per reference serving size, or RAC. To make an excellent rich source or high source of protein claim, it must contain 20% of the DRV for protein, so 10 grams per serving size. Looking at the allergenicity of foods, well, food allergens have become a big issue, in part because the U.S. Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act of 2004 requires that we label foods that contain any of these 8 listed allergens. And that is because it was determined that these allergens, milk, eggs, fish, crustaceans, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and soybeans, account for an estimated 90% or more of all food allergies. Because of this, the FALCBA Act required that all foods be clearly identified for containing these ingredients if they contain these ingredients at any level. So if any of these identified allergens are present, you must have a warning label on a product. Well, pulses can play a very important role because they do not require such warning labels, and also because as functional ingredients, they can play roles as significant alternatives, or I should say they have to be 100% alternatives for those allergens marked in red, i.e. milk, eggs, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and soybeans. And we'll give you some specific examples of that shortly. Well, why are food allergens of such concern? In part because, like a lot of autoimmune diseases, the incidence of food allergies has been increasing, as this data showing the incidence of allergies in children up to 17 years of age shows. These are the long-term trend lines for the reported allergy incidences in children. How big is the allergen-averse market opportunity? We're using this term because you cannot say a product is allergen-free, so we're using the term allergen-averse to mark this trend. Well, according to Packaged Facts, which is often cited, this Packaged Facts report published in October 2012, they indicated that the market for gluten-free, and which is one specific, albeit the largest segment of allergen allergen-averse products, they placed the value of this market at $4.2 billion in 2012. In September of 2011, Spins Mentel came out with a survey or projection of the market size, which said in 2012 it was $6 billion. However, they recognized upon being questioned that they had not included Walmart, which these surveys do not include. And upon revisiting their data, they boosted up that projection at $12.4 billion in 2012. However, if we look at the categories that are not included in the Packaged Facts or the Spins Mentel gluten-free market surveys, that includes not just the Walmart that was addressed in the Spins Mentel survey, although I don't understand how they doubled their projection just based on Walmart, since Walmart is estimated to represent about 15% of all retail and food service sales in the United States. Sorry, that's a typo. That should be Trader Joe's, restaurant and food service, store brands, PLU or coded entry sales, multi-level marketers, and internet sales of foods are not captured in these product scan-based surveys. So based on that and trying to make adjustments, we came up with our own estimate that the current market for gluten and allergen-free products is about 10 to 15 billion with a potential to reach 70 billion by 2020, after which we believe it'll taper off somewhat. Again, a reminder that if you do have questions that you'd like to address directly to us, please send them to Mackenzie Femright at the address that's listed below. There's a typo in this address. It should not be T-E-L at the end of her name. It's just T-E. We'll get that fixed after this presentation. Looking at pulse proteins in food and beverages, we like to address bakery goods, cakes, cookies, battered and fried products, pasta, beverages, and smoothies. Well, how to use pulses as egg alternatives and extenders has been a focus of a lot of work that's been done at the Northern Crops Institute. And we're giving a shout out to our friends at the Northern Crops Institute, especially Professor Cliff Hall and Tonya Porn Jaradashashai, also known as Nagy. They've been extremely helpful to us. They've done a tremendous amount of research in this area, and I really strongly recommend that you contact them for specific information or advice in food product development or other uses of pulses. Now, looking at pea flour properties, some of the properties in product development that, to restate what was said earlier, include aeration and foaming, binding and adhesion, emulsification, humectancy, crispiness, strength in products, and also thickening mouthfeel properties. Now, if we look at what the pea proteins specifically provide in terms of these pulse flour properties, we look at aeration and foaming, binding and adhesion, emulsification, and also increasing the crispiness and strength of baked products or extruded products. Looking at sweet bakery goods, pulse protein can substitute for egg and dairy products. Looking at cakes and cookies, some of the properties that we look for from ingredients like egg and dairy in these products are aeration, foaming, binding, adhesion, emulsification, gelation, and coagulation. All of these properties can be found from these following pulse-based ingredients. We can substitute up to 100% of the egg and dairy ingredients in a product such as a layer cake. Looking into work that was done at the Northern Crops Institute, looking at a white cake formulation in which pea protein was used to substitute for fresh whole egg, it was found that cakes could be produced very similar in appearance using pea protein concentrate, freeze-dried pea protein isolate, spray-dried pea protein isolate, and liquid egg. Now, if there is a slight difference in color and also in volume using pea protein concentrate, remember that the pea protein concentrate does not contain as much protein as the pea protein isolate. But using a pea protein isolate, you can come up with a product very similar in appearance to a product produced with liquid egg. Looking at the same formula, our friends at the Northern Crops Institute looked at the properties of the pea protein isolate versus egg albumin, and they found that the foaming capacity of the pea protein isolate and the egg albumin were very, very similar, but where they differed was in the foam stability. Pea protein isolate does not generate as stable a foam as does egg albumin. In fact, not anywhere close. So the way to deal with that is by adding xanthan gum or pea starch that provides some coagulation that will help to strengthen that foam and hold it in place while the cake structure is being formed. If we look at the sensory properties of white cake, they looked at the appearance, flavor, texture, and overall acceptability of the cake that was developed with pea protein isolate and with egg, and ignoring the column in green because that was part of a separate study, but just looking at the blue and the red, we find that in appearance, the pea protein isolate was actually preferred over the egg version of the cake, and that the flavor and the texture and the overall acceptability of these were very, very similar. How does that impact on nutritional labels? Well, we don't use as much pea protein isolate in cake as we might other ingredients. But looking at a gluten-free shortbread, this is based on an actual product that we developed on behalf of a client of my company. Looking at a gluten-free shortbread where the gluten-free flour consisted of tapioca flour and rice flour. Replacing part of that gluten-free flour, actually 30% of that gluten-free blend of tapioca and rice flour with lentil flour, resulted in a significant increase in protein quality. In fact, it doubled it from 1 to 2 grams per serving, and increase the total dietary fiber from 0 to 2 grams per 30 gram serving. So it's not a major change, but it certainly is an enhancement of the nutritional profile of that product. Looking at sugar snap cookies, I would show you a picture which would show that they pretty much looked identical, but looking at the sensory lab results for a sugar cookie formula in which pea protein was used to replace fresh egg, pea protein in the form of isolate and concentrate, we find that product made with pea protein isolate was virtually identical to cookies made with egg in all of these cases, looking at the sensory evaluation. Looking at a gluten-free pasta, and this is where we've seen a really interesting development with regard to the use of pulses. Using a base formula consisting of 100% pulse flour and 32 to 35% water. This is just a quick outline of the process used. Over here you see Nagy working on the equipment. Basically, the process involves blending the dry ingredients, adding water, 30 to 35% water on the flour basis, using warm water at 40 degrees centigrade or 104 degrees Fahrenheit, mixing the blend and then extruding it and cutting it. A pretty standard procedure for making pasta. What we find out is that the more pea flour that you add to a formula, going from 0% up to 20%, the stronger the firmness of the product. You get a more al dente product by incorporating pea flour into the formula. The robustness to cooking also increased, albeit slightly. Now, the key to producing gluten-free pasta is to pre-gelatinize the starch prior to extruding. So you want a pre-cook step in that process if you want a more al dente product. And a useful tip is you can add a little bit of calcium sulfate to the product in order to increase texture and robustness. If we look at pasta and its the use of pulses and their effect on color, we find that at least at low levels, 10% yellow pea and 10% green pea, there are minor effects on color. But if we go to 100% formulations, such as in this photo, you're looking at 100% chickpea, or over here you're looking at 100% yellow pea, you find some interesting effects on color. And they're not unattractive, but they are going to be different. Some of these colored differences, as in the example of these rotini samples that we're showing you, some of these color differences will cook out when the pasta is boiled. Again, addition of 0.5% to 1% calcium sulfate will improve the al dente quality and robustness of the product. Now, how does that affect nutritional claims? Looking at the rack, the recommended amount as customarily consumed serving size, remember, is 55 grams for pasta. So that is the reference amount that we have to use for the rack, or the rack that we have to use for pasta. At 55 grams, not the 85 grams indicated on the nutritional statement for this product, but the 55 grams. That 55 grams contains 13.5 grams of protein per serving, or almost 25% of the formula. The DRV value for protein, if you recall, is 50 grams per day. So 20% of 50 grams, which would be required from an excellent source of protein, would be 10 grams. At 13.5 grams of protein per serving, we exceed that value, which allows us to claim that this product is an excellent source of protein. And I just couldn't help resist throwing in that the product also contains 8.4 grams of total dietary fiber per serving. Now, the DRV value for the dietary fiber is 25 grams per day. 20% of 25 grams is 5 grams. 8.4 grams of total dietary fiber exceeds 5 grams, which also allows us to make an excellent source of fiber claim for this product. Now, we should also not overlook the fact that adding pulses, or in this case, making a pasta that is 100% made from pulses, does very nice things to the other nutritional values as well. Riboflavin, calcium, vitamin B6, iron, thiamine, niacin, folate, and zinc. All very high values for the food product. So you have a very nutritious product there. Looking at egg washes and binders for fried foods. One of the things that we use egg washes for in fried foods, whether it's fried meats or fried vegetables, is that they provide binding and adhesion, emulsification. They also provide an oil barrier, and that they provide gelation and coagulation. Again, these are qualities that can be provided by a variety of pulse ingredients, and you can play with these ingredients to optimize the quality. But suffice to say, you can develop an egg wash and binder for fried foods that is 100% free of egg or dairy ingredients when using pulse-based ingredients. Looking at this example of an eggless tempura batter, we're using in this case pre-gelled yellow pea flour at a level of 2.3% of formula in the batter mix. Looking at the process that we would use in the mix, we would use 20 grams of pre-gelled pea flour to 250 grams of all-purpose flour. We'd pre-dust the meat or the vegetables in the mixture. We would then create a batter by blending the dry ingredients listed on your left, adding water, blending till smooth, and then dipping the meat or vegetable in the batter. And then we would basically roll the batter in tempura crumbs and add to oil and fry until done at a 350-degree Fahrenheit temperature. And we thank Harvest Innovations for providing this example. The degree of egg or dairy substitution in this case, also 100%, 100% egg or dairy-free batter and breading. Looking at beverages and smoothies, let's talk about some of the basics in beverage design. One of the important things we need to look at is the isoelectric point, which is the pH at which the proteins are least soluble and will therefore precipitate out or flocculate out of a liquid. The pH point for pulse proteins, remember pea, chickpea, and lentil proteins are all pretty much similar in their properties. The pH of the isoelectric point is 4.6, so a somewhat slightly acidic product. The solubility characteristics of those proteins will depend upon how the proteins are processed. Therefore, you may want to talk to different suppliers of the proteins to determine what the desired solubility of those proteins is. But in general, the protein for pulses, the protein solubility of pulses is about 20% at a pH of less than 3 or greater than 5.5. 50% soluble protein can be, 50% protein solubility can be achieved if the pH is less than 2.5 or greater than 6.5. And you can use organic acids like malic acid, citric acid, various acids to develop buffers at the desired pH in your beverage. So what does that mean in terms of the types of products that you would be working with? Here's some reference pHs. For example, milk and sweet whey generally have a pH that approaches neutrality, and in these products you're going to be close to maximum solubility for a pulse protein. When you get to coffee, there's a wide range of pH values for coffee depending on the source of the coffee, how it was processed. And so if you want to make a coffee-based beverage in which you have pulse protein, you're going to want to get closer to neutrality. At the lower level of 5, you may run into some problems. You certainly do not want to add pulse proteins to either a vinegar-based product in the salad dressing or in a yogurt smoothie, because the pH there is going to be too close to the isoelectric point of the pulse protein. Now you can always change the pH through formulation to make it more acceptable for the protein. Root beer and apple juice start coming into acidity levels where you're a bit at the cusp where you're going to have solubility problems and you might have grittiness in your products. But if you get down into the more acidic products like Coca-Cola and orange juice, you should be fine and you should be able to enjoy high levels of solubility if you should decide to make beverage products using those raw materials. Let's look at a cinnamon vanilla protein beverage, and again, I thank Harvest Innovations for sharing this formulation with us. A cinnamon vanilla protein beverage, which uses water as a carrier, so therefore relatively neutral pH and with high solubility. You simply blend the dry ingredients together, add to hot water at 203 degrees Fahrenheit or 95 degrees centigrade, close to boiling, and then add the ingredients while mixing, and then mix at high shear for about 3 minutes. What this gives you is a product that has 16 grams of protein, and at 16 grams of protein per serving, it does qualify for an excellent source of protein claim. So if you want to make beverages or smoothies for bodybuilders and such, you can do a very good job of it using a pulse protein. Here's another example, a chocolate-flavored protein beverage. Now, chocolate particles will put you even more into the neutral range of pH. So you're going to get a very nice solubility. Looking at this formula using pea protein isolate, sugar, cocoa powder, gellan gum, vanilla flavor, and salt. Now, the gellan gum is there to help keep in suspension the cocoa powder and other particulates in the beverage. You're going to need some level of viscosity to hold these particles in suspension. In this case, what you would do is blend the dry ingredients together, add to hot water while mixing at low speed, high shear for 3 minutes, very similar to what the previous example said. But in this case, homogenizing at 10,000 psi will greatly improve both the mouthfeel properties of the beverage and also the stability of the beverage when stored over time. In this case, we have a protein level per serving of 17 grams, and that again is well into an excellent source of protein claim territory. So, as a summary and conclusions, again, please email your questions to Mackenzie Femright if you have any after this presentation. But looking quickly at the summary and conclusions of this presentation, we'd also like to share with you some resources, some go-to resources for information in your own product that will help your own product development activities, and save a little bit of time for Q&A. Quickly, the summary and conclusions. Pulses represent a very environmental friendly and sustainable food source. They're rich sources of high quality and cost-effective protein ingredients. Consumers right now are actively looking for protein in their foods. Pulse proteins do not require allergen warning labels on food packages. They will reproduce most or all of the functional properties of other food proteins in specific product applications. Product applications we've looked at for layer cakes, pulse proteins can replace 100% of egg or milk ingredients, but also need a gelling ingredient to help stabilize the foam. Cookies, again, pulse proteins can replace 100% of egg or milk ingredients. In pasta, you can replace 100% of the wheat in a pasta formula. For fried meats and vegetables, pulse proteins and flours can replace 100% of the egg in batters and egg washes. And finally, if you're working with beverages, you can use pulse proteins to really boost up the protein content, but the pH will be critical. As far as additional resources, I strongly encourage you to contact Mackenzie Femright. Also, our friends at the Northern Crops Institute, please feel free to call Nagy Jaradashishai. She's a wonderful person to work with and very, very helpful. And if you have any questions regarding this presentation, please give me a call at info@bestmanaginc.com. In terms of industry resources, these are the suppliers of pulse protein ingredients that we'd highly recommend you contact for more information on specific ingredients and their specifications, or to obtain samples. For future reference, a downloadable copy of this webinar presentation will be posted at the USA Dry Pea and Lentil Council website in the near future. And we do have one more webinar in this series, as Mackenzie referred to at the beginning of this presentation. And I'd like to now open it up for questions.
Thank you, Dan. Lots of information in that presentation. How's everyone's brains? That was great. Can you hear me, Dan?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, great, great.
Has anybody posted any questions about this presentation that I can help with?
Nobody has thus far.
Well, I know that this has been a long presentation, and we've gone almost exactly to the end of our 1 hour allotted period. But I'm quite willing to stay on if there are any other questions over the next few minutes. And otherwise, people can always contact us directly if they would like more information.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend you guys do that. Please use us as a resource. That's what we're here for. So we'll just hang on a couple more minutes and hang out to see if we have any more questions. And if not, I want to thank you all for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
Well, I hope that nobody's nursing headaches at the end of this high information presentation. We try to put in as much information as possible to make it worthwhile to everybody. Please do fill out the survey that you will be sent immediately after this presentation. That's very important information for us to try to continue to improve the quality of these presentations and also to get some direction as to what our next presentation should be.
And Dan, I did get one question and the question is there any more research on using pea protein in nutritional beverage applications?
You know, that's a very good question, because we're seeing work being done with pea proteins in some like liquid meal preparations and such. So there is a lot of research being done at the industrial level. I would strongly recommend contacting the suppliers of the pea protein concentrates and isolates. My experience in working with them is that they have a pretty good wealth of information that should provide starting formulas and also processing guidance for such products. Unfortunately, we cannot endorse any specific supplier in this program.
Very true.
We give you the names of some of the suppliers, and I do recommend contacting those that we indicated.
Definitely. And I want to mention, too, at the Culinary Institute of America, the USA Dry Pea Lentil Council had a product development course last week in Napa Valley, and we actually split up into different groups, one being a beverage group to use different applications. And my favorite recipe was actually the cinnamon vanilla protein beverage that you talked about, Dan. It was very, very good. And Nagy from the Northern Crops Institute actually came up with those applications. So I also highly recommend contacting Nagy. And I also have another question for you, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
How is the texture of pulse flour compared to rice flour in gluten-free applications?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to try to answer it in the best way that I can. The texture of the flour will, let's say a baked application or a tortilla application, the texture of the flour will often depend on the specific processing conditions to which the product is subjected. So you can use a rice flour in a product, but in many gluten-free products that I've worked with, if you don't process it right, you can get a gritty texture. And that gritty texture is very often directly related to the interaction of the rice flour with the water as part of the formulation and processing. When you're dealing with a pea protein, you're going to have a different interaction with the water. My own experience working with pea protein and also some of the other pulse protein ingredients, has been that you tend to get a very good texture using those ingredients. So I don't know if that's, to be quite honest, if that's directly related to the nature of those pulse protein ingredients I work with, or if it's specific to the processing, the immediate processing conditions to which the pulse protein was subjected. So I guess bottom line, my recommendation would be, based on my own experience that I have not had any problems with textures using pulse protein, is look very carefully at how the water in the process is handled. A lot of the quality of these products relates down to the most important ingredient in my view, which is water.
Great, Darren. Thank you so much.
Not a short answer, but it's it's a complex question. It was a good question.
It was a great question. He also added excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to, I have another question that came in, but I can't read the beginning of the question. Are there any specific gums, pectins, used to protein the, are there any specific gums, pectins, used in the pea protein and nutritional beverages?
Yes, one of the formulas that we showed had gelan gum. But I think the questioner was right. You can also use pectin gums. There's a wide variety of different gums that can be used to help provide a suspension of particles and also to help stabilize the proteins in the beverage. The guar gum, of course, is one gum, but the price and availability of guar have been somewhat problematic in the past. But I think if you work with any of the major gum suppliers, hydrocolloid suppliers, they should be able to recommend a gum that is going to help stabilize a beverage formulation.
Great. One more, and then we will wrap it up. How does the absorption of lentil flour compare to soft wheat flour?
That's a good question, and I'm going to beg off answering that because I have not done a side-by-side comparison of the two.
Gotcha.
I can say that on the basis of the work we did on that shortbread formulation, for example, that we didn't have to do a major change in the amount of water that went into formulation. And that was up to a 30% replacement of the wheat flour with, I'm sorry, that was with tapioca and rice flour. So they were comparable to that, if that helps. But that's a good question, and the absorption qualities of these different flours really is critical to the formulation.
And Dan, I did get one common question that I would like to throw out there is, do you get much pea flavor from the pea flour?
That will depend on the source of your pea ingredient. There are a couple of companies, and again, we can't endorse one company or the other, that use, I think, some very effective processing to eliminate any pea flavor. And as I showed in the examples using the layer cake and the cookies where sensory evaluation was done, I should point out that that work was done at the Northern Crops Institute, and they developed their own protein isolates. These were not commercial protein isolates that they used in the formulation. But in those formulations, there was no negative perception of flavor that was contributed to the product by the pea protein isolates. They all scored very similar to the egg-containing controls. So I would make sure that, that's a very good question to ask a pea protein supplier. How do you deal with a flavor issue? as I indicated in one of the earlier slides of this presentation, there are oxidase, lipoxidase enzymes that have to be inactivated, just as they do with soy protein flours, for example. And it will, the degree to which they're inactivated will have to be addressed by the suppliers.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And again, thank you for those attendees who stayed on with us through the question and answer period. And I hope to see you guys back at the end of October for our final and last webinar. And please don't forget to do the survey so we can better serve you here from the council. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and thanks for signing in.
And thank you, Mackenzie.